Hi, and welcome to Books and Beyond. I'm Jimmy Bennett, your host. Books and Beyond is a show where we try to help people personify their aspirations. Today, I have a very special guest, Larry Zaccaro, a fellow author and friend. But first, I'd like to talk just a second about CAPA, the Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association. We are meeting virtually on Zoom the third Monday of every month. The next one, I believe, is January 18th at 6 o'clock. If you go to the Southeastern Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association webpage or Facebook page, you should be able to find the link. We encourage everybody to join us and all the members, of course, to touch base. It's been a hard road here with COVID. We've not been able to meet in person, which has been a kind of a bummer for everybody, but we're getting through it. We're all getting used to it. And it's good to talk to other people about the challenges and the rewards of writing. So I encourage everybody to do that. But now I'd like to get right to my guest, Larry Zaccaro, who is as I said, a fellow author and a fellow member of CAPA. Hey, Larry, how you doing?
Great, Jim. Thanks so much for asking me to come on. Great to see you, even if it's virtual.
Yep. Well, you're setting the record. I think you've got the most appearances on the show. You've been very busy during this COVID crisis, which is great. It's good to see.
I have, actually. We can get into a little bit more detail about the process of that and how I've done it, but I've had a little bit of discipline to get a few things done, so we can talk about that.
Right.
This is I think my third appearance as a guest, and then as you recall, I guest hosted once, so you could talk about your book. So that was a lot of fun.
Yep. That's great. I'm surprised because from talking to fellow authors and stuff, you would think during this COVID period that everybody would be pumping out, book after book after book, but it doesn't seem to be so prevalent as I thought it was going to be. But I've been busy, trying to keep busy. I write every day. But I want to really talk about a little bit about what you've done. Now, you redid Convergence.
I did. As you recall, the first time I was on, I talked about a novel I wrote and was published 20 years ago called Parallel. And about 5 years ago, I adapted that novel into a screenplay and changed some key components, the same general premise and some same important ideas that I tried to get out of that story. Wrote it into a screenplay, and then I didn't have any connections to the movie industry. I haven't been able to get any progress on having people read that or any exposure to it. So in March, after everything shut down, I had some great vacations planned. We had all our meetings have changed to virtual. So one day, all of a sudden, it became quite clear that I could do this, and really got into, after rewriting Convergent, as I renamed it, very aggressively. So I actually readapted the screenplay back to a novel, filled in some more details, added some new scenes, changed a couple of the characters fairly significantly, but kept the same premise and the flow and the main conclusions, plot resolution and things pretty much the same. And as you and I have talked about, that came out in June last year, and that's available on Amazon and locally from Bank Square Books in Savoy bookstore and things. But that actually took me, I think, about 6 weeks, 8 weeks to really aggressively get after it, really focus on rewriting it and getting it to the form that I wanted it to be. And then I hired an artist for the cover and polished it up, and that was actually released in June. So that process, once everything was canceled, we couldn't travel, I stayed home except for shopping and a few other things, really got after that and pulled that together and really couple of months almost. So that took a bit of diligence really to
And you
concentrate.
changed the name of the book from Parallel to Convergent.
There's a very specific reason for that. And I don't know if I've talked about this before, but Parallel was actually the original publisher's requested title that changed it from what I had originally had it 20 years ago. And though it's two stories that are told in parallel, and then they come crashing together in the climax, they're really converging stories. So they come together, they're convergent, but there's a lot more meaning to that word as the title. And parallel isn't actually accurate. So there's a lot of premises and a recurring theme, and a lot of the ideas in the book are we tend to separate our human thought into separate groups, into black and white thinking, if you want to think of it that way. We separate ourselves unnaturally, and those separations become more important than the premises or the intelligence or the actions that we can actually accomplish together. We can talk more about that later on, but the whole story is to bring ideas together into the same real platform. Science and religion is really the key recurring theme, that a scientific explanation for God and really for love and how we need to act on the concept of love and how we can best use it globally and of course in our own families and society. So Convergence, a much more accurate title, and I'm really excited about the way that came out.
Great, that's good. I mean, I enjoyed it very much. And now I'd like to ask you about Chandler's List.
Okay.
I haven't read it yet, so I don't know anything about it. So give me the whole lowdown.
Chandler's List could not be any more different than a book from Convergent. Chandler's List is a comedy and with some adult content. Now, it is based on an idea that I've had kicking around in my head for a long time, 10, 12 years at least. And that one, again, this was actually after I got laid off from my career, and I was trying to find productive avenues to express my creativity and things. We talked about my game Wordplay, which I invented quite a while ago. But that was actually one of the first new things that I wrote. And again, I wrote it as a screenplay about 5 years ago. And I polished it a bit, changed it a bit. Now, the story takes place here in southeastern Connecticut. It's a couple that's 40-ish, and they have 3 kids. They're both working full-time. It's a very real-world existence with a lot of debt, a lot of demands from the kids, from the careers and so forth. And their marriage is under a bit of stress. So the premise is they're trying to reconcile or rediscover themselves. And as it says in the book description online and on the back cover, on a spontaneous, almost by accident event, they sort of rediscover their passion and their love of each other. And then they set on a kind of a romantic, and I think I word it as a risky and risque adventure to rekindle their love for each other. So I won't tell you what the list is. That would be a spoiler alert.
All right.
What I did was I picked out a lot of famous locations really in New England. So several of them are right here in our backyard. The Nautilus, very famous first nuclear submarine. The Morgan, the oldest wooden commercial ship, whaling ship, right here again in southeastern Connecticut. Cape Cod was within distance, famous store in New England and Maine, which I won't mention by name, but I think we can all guess which famous store is based in Maine, and Fenway Park. So these are all like very famous locations in Northeast United States and New England. And the main couple, Tom and Deb are their names, Chandler, which is a play on another book, another very famous story that has List in the title, kind of devise a list that kind of takes them through this adventure, and all throughout their humorous situations. And a lot of the humor comes from things that the children are doing that they have to deal with. And I have to tell you that most of the things that the kids do that end up being funny, hopefully they're funny, are based on real things, mostly that I did or that my siblings did when we were kids. Now, a few things my own kids did as they were growing up, things like that. Some are completely made up, but I got a lot of the details, a lot of the information from real events, and worked that all through the story and kind of kept the humor continuous throughout. And I think it's pretty good, actually. Some of the humor in the situations, it's tastefully done, and there's some very key descriptions. So if you've seen the book cover, on the back cover there's a scene where there's a setting sun, and this is actually exactly a real scene that I witnessed 40 years ago on a place on Cape Cod called Race Point Beach. It's one of the few places on the East Coast where you actually can see the sunset over the ocean. I was there. The sun was setting on an absolutely flat, calm water. And the sun was orange, the sky was orange, the water was gold and absolutely calm. And the only ripple in the water was a humpback whale slowly swimming through the water from north to south, creating a wake across the water. It was absolutely mesmerizing, beautiful scene. I recounted that for the artist, and he did a great job recreating that. That's the back cover. So that's actually a real event. The main characters, I have them witness that as well. So I picked a lot of real life things in real places and incorporated that as numerous settings throughout the story. Now it's a very easy read. I don't even know if you can officially call it a novel. I think it's 36,000 words or something. It's very short and very quick read for a novel, but I think the reader will probably be amused by it. Hopefully they'll find it tasteful and funny. And another angle on the humor was some work humor that I incorporated a bit from my own career. And I asked my daughter and some other people for some examples of things that they've experienced at work. And I kind of fictionalized things and worked it all in so that hopefully it's funny throughout the entire story.
Wow. There's 2 points about that I want to bring up.
Yep.
One is, how did you find, I'm asking because I actually wrote a book for my wife for Christmas. It wasn't a book that I was really planning on getting published or anything, but it was completely outside of my genre. I write, murder mystery or crime mystery, whatever. And this was more of like a Hallmark, feel good Christmas story type of thing, and I found it was hard for me, I don't know, to write that way because it was not in what I usually do. It wasn't in my comfort zone. But I thought, well, if you're a writer, you should be able to write whatever you need to write, so, and I think it came out pretty good. But how was it hard for you to change gears like that from the deep philosophical implications of Convergent to a lighthearted?
Yeah, there was definitely a paradigm shift in my mindset to write this. Now, even Convergent, there's 2 parallel stories that converge. One is 2,000 years ago, one is today. Even that, keeping the language of the characters, the settings, things, I wrote those separately, so my narrative would sound connected in the two stories. And then, of course, through the miracle of editing software, I could just cut and paste and then interlace the stories into one unified tale. But in Chandler's List, definitely thinking, like I said, it couldn't be more different than Convergent in that the narration is funny. The characters, even though there's some serious things that happen, it has to be kind of continuous, funny settings and funny reconciliation of scenes and things. And the main problem, I think, with the screenplay that I initially wrote is it wasn't funny enough, right? There wasn't enough continuous humor.
Yeah.
And so the big part of adapting the novel from the screenplay was incorporating a lot more humor, a lot more incidents of what the children did, a lot more funnier things at his workplace, and just some situational things that the main couple gets themselves into. Added those, wrote a lot about those, and I kept adding them. I asked my siblings, we've been Zooming all year for the past year, once a week or so. I asked them, what's some things that you guys remember that we did that were funny? And I kind of picked a list of those, and I kept adding, kept enhancing some of the scenes and some of the flow that the kids did in some other situations. So it was a whole different mindset and how to write it and how to present it. And it needed to stay funny, and it needed to have a happy resolution, which I think I pulled off. I'll tell you one thing, even that it happened to me about a year and a half ago, that I worked in right at the end, a little bit of a spoiler alert of Chandler's List. We went to Main Street Grill, I think. It's in Niantic, and we were getting lobster rolls out on the deck. And the waitress brought out our lobster rolls for the three of us, put the tray on a table over by the railing, brought two over. And when she had brought it over, all of a sudden I see a seagull come flying over and grabbed the entire lobster roll in one motion and flew away with the whole thing without spilling a single piece of lobster. Oh, that was, when it happened, I thought that was hilarious.
Yep.
And, bad for the restaurant because they brought me another one. And that I added that in, it's not part of the plot necessarily. It was just an absurdly funny scene that really happened.
Well, I think anybody who lives along the shoreline can sort of appreciate that one,
Under umbrellas, restaurants with outside dining here all have to have wires or something protecting us. But that they kind of left it unprotected just for that 30 seconds. And that seagull was ready and made a very athletic move to pick up the whole thing.
That's great. The other thing I'd like to talk to you a little bit about was, now this is twice you said that you've taken screenplays and turned them into novels.
Yes.
Now, like the book that I just wrote, the novel I just wrote, I think it would be a better screenplay than it would be a novel, just because of the setting and the characters. It's far too much complex, too much description is needed to really get a feel for it. Mm-hmm. Where if you visualize it, it would be, I think, awesome. But have you ever converted a novel to a screenplay, and what's the process with that?
I did. I actually, the first time I wrote Convergent, which was still parallel, converted to a screenplay, I did do that. So a few key things. There are very specific softwares available that everything is formatted exactly as a screenplay needs to be, with scene introductions and headings and characters and what they're saying and how they say it. And in almost all circumstances, almost all cases, screenplays have a very specific length. They can't be more than 120 pages, not more, not 1 minute more. But 1 page of a screenplay translates to about a minute of movie time, give or take. Of course, it's flexible depending on what the actual nature of the scene. But one page of conversation, say, is about a minute of movie time. So getting that software, which I have, is a very, very big step. Now, a few things you can think about on that is that you don't have the thoughts of the characters. In narration of a book, you can write what the characters are thinking, unless you do narration of a movie. But so it's almost all visual. You have to get everything across in visual display, like you say, or what the characters are saying. So that's a very different twist on how to write it than, he was thinking, he did this, or while this was going on, this was happening. That's a very different thing. And the writing needs to be very, very efficient. Need to really minimize the words in the conversation. Can't have long descriptions, or the conversation of the characters can't go on like I'm doing right now, for example. Usually they're much quicker written. So that's a key difference as well. But what you write is pretty much what's going to be heard and said. And that's the main difference, I think. It's a display or a presentation of what's going to be seen and heard, not what characters are thinking or things that might be happening out of a scene. That's a big difference.
I didn't think about that, but I suppose that's where the acting comes in, where people use their body language and expressions and stuff like that to show. I haven't really thought about that whole process where you can't really what the character's thinking. He has to show it, and then you have to sort of take it from there.
You can use adjectives that describe how the character is saying this or that very, very succinctly. But there is a great deal of interpretation that is necessary by producers, directors, and the actors themselves to translate that onto the screen. So I'm speaking sort of not necessarily theoretically, but I haven't actually worked on a movie, but I know I've read many, many screenplays, and I've read movies I've seen and many screenplays that those movies were made from. And it gives you and that would be a good exercise for you to try too. You can find those, and surprisingly available at libraries and other things.
Yeah, I will. Well, we could talk more about this another time or later, but right now, because I don't want to miss this. Now, you're also working on a new children's book.
Oh, that's right.
Yes, I realize that it isn't published yet, and I don't want you to give out too many spoilers, but I would like to talk about that and your other one, which I think is great, Amy and New Yorker. So tell us a little bit about that.
So Amy and New York came out about 2.5 years ago, and that is derived from a real event that happened to my family and me. We were on an orca watching trip off of Washington State in the San Juan Islands in the Pacific Ocean. And we saw lots of orcas. It was a great day. But at one point, my daughter, who had her flute on the boat, started playing her flute. And she asked me what she should play. I said, a slow, haunting melody, something very melodic. And as she played, we could see 2 female orcas that were swimming kind of in the general direction of the boat. And as they got closer, it soon became apparent that each time they came to the surface to take a breath, they paused longer and longer as they were taking a breath, slowing more and more. When they got to their closest point of the boat, they stopped dead in the water. It's about 30 feet away from the boat, and started singing back to her flute. Now, that was a magical moment that these wild orcas were not only responding, they were trying to talk back to her music. I took that wrote, fictionalized it a bit, made more of a backstory of a girl learning to play the flute, and another orca, a young orca whale near where she lived in the ocean. And they made a connection, just like my daughter did with the orcas, and turned that into a story. Had a great artist who drew all the colorful, great artwork for that story. So that's been out 2.5 years, and actually that is my largest selling book so far.
Nice. That is great. We're running low on time here, Larry, so I'm just gonna say real quick. I know that you're working on a new children's book.
Yeah. So I'll tell you about that very quickly. I made up. It takes place again in southeastern Connecticut, though I don't say that specifically, and it actually takes place in my house, and I have a barn. And there is an elderly woman who tends a garden, and there is a fictitious animal that lives under the stones of her barn that she doesn't know about until her husband dies, and she's really sad. And these little animals, they're called plopes. And I won't tell you what they look like or anything. It's a made-up word, and the whole thing is derived from just a word that my kids used when they were young, and I developed it into a whole long story. And
wow.
I have the story completed, polish it here or there. I have artwork concepts kind of set up, and I'll continue to expand those. I'll hire the same artist who did Amy and the Orca, and that'll be out later this year. It'll probably be a few months yet, but that's a good place that I'll keep moving on it and get it out.
That's quite a process on getting it. Especially I was thinking the artist's concepts. When you think about a scene, and then you have to give it to somebody else to draw it for you, so it looks though what you have in your mind. Do you make a rough sketch of it, or?
I have done that a couple times, but what the artist, her and the artist I've done the covers with, I will describe what I have in mind for a particular scene. Maybe one sentence, it may be several sentences. Then they'll do a pencil sketch of it. I'll say it needs this, it needs that, it's not quite right. And we'll go back and forth on that. And when I like the pencil sketch, then they go with the full illustration of it.
All right.
So this one will have 20 or so illustrations in it. It'll actually be a bit longer of a book, but
all right. Well, we'll talk about it more when it comes out.
Okay.
I'll have you back on. I think you've been a great guest, Larry, and it was a fascinating thinking about your journey. It's good to see that you're staying busy, producing. It's a tough time for everybody, but hopefully we're coming to the end. I don't know, 7th inning, right? We talked about that earlier. Maybe not the home stretch, but the 7th inning,
I'll keep doing work while I'm kind of in the working mode and inside. And then when we're able to travel and do fun things, then I'll do a lot more of that.
Yeah, then we'll go out and hit some events and
yeah,
signings and stuff, all right?
Yeah, very good.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for being on today, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching. I hope if you're a writer, I hope you're encouraged. I hope you enjoy it. Please check out Larry's books. They're on Amazon and at Bank Square Books in Savoy. Until next time, my name is Jimmy Bennett. This has been Books and Beyond. Thank you very much.